Come here. Get off.
Hey, good people. So, today, I don't even know how to explain how excited we are.
We never do. This is a very special episode of the Turn On. But this is a very special episode of the Turn On.
Yeah, it's true. Because, y'all, today we're talking to Adrienne Maree Brown. When we first had the idea to do this show, there was a very short list of folks who we knew we wanted to talk to. And Adrienne was on that list. And you don't even write erotica. We was like, details.
Oh, I do.
Oh, what? Wait.
We'll talk about it.
Oh, shit. You coming? Okay. Yep. So let's get into the intro so then we can get into the stuff. Okay. So Adrienne's pronouns are she and they. Adrienne is the author of Grievers.
Oh
That's
gosh,
my copy. The first in her novella series with the Black Dawn imprint. Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy, Facilitation, and Mediation. We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good. Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds. And the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements. She's also the co-host of the How to Survive the End of the World and Octavia's Parables podcast. And Adrienne is rooted in Durham. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having this show and thanks for having me on it.
Yay.
So, Adrienne, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I love that question. Gosh. Well, there's always been a dual path for me. So I always wanted to be a writer. I always knew I was a writer. Like as a kid, I was writing stories, but I was also a performer. Like I wanted to be a singing, dancing, theatrical star. And I actually auditioned. I mean, I was in every dance class, every, play, like everything like that, my whole childhood. And I went to the North Atlanta High School of the Performing Arts, where I was told I was on path to become the next Jasmine Guy, which was like, I was like, I'm for it. I'm here for it. I love A Different World and I'm here for it. So yeah, it was always like a performer and a writer, always a creative endeavor.
Well, so usually my next question is, how did you get from there to here? But it's a straight line, kind of, sort of.
No, I mean, I spent 25 years in social justice movement work thinking definitely like I'm never going to be a performer or a singer or anything like that. And, or if I do, I'll only do it like, like I'll sing in movement spaces or I'll sing to like gather people back from small groups or something like that, which I did. I used to be like, it's time, and then writing on the side, I was like, I blog, I do stuff over here, but I really, for a while, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get this fiction thing happening or books happening. So, and that was okay because I am a good facilitator. I'm a great facilitator and I love doing it. It uses my brain in ways that are good for my brain. Like I synthesize, I can hear between the lines. But there was a period where I was like, okay, this is my life of service. And the other part just kept knocking at the door. Like, but there's songs and there's books and there's stories and there's other stuff. So my close friends and family will tell you that like at least once a year I call them like, I'm a writer. And they're like, yes, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. Everyone already knows that. So what are you going to do about it? And then after having published several nonfiction works, I was like, I'm a fiction writer, you know, and they're like, yeah, what you gonna do about it? But I have continuously kept trusting the process, like trusting, like I write, you know, I just keep writing. I joke around like I stay writing. And if I have, like, that might be what goes on my tombstone. It's just like, she stayed writing. Like, you know,
Stay writing.
she stayed writing. She probably still writing. I'll be a little ancestor. They're like, you know, thoughts on the afterlife. But yeah, so it doesn't feel like a straight line to me, but it does feel, it feels like I'm landing in something that I always knew I was supposed to be in.
So what's your favorite thing about what you do?
I get a lot of pleasure from what I do. Like on a daily basis, I love my work. And the more I talk to other people who write, the more I recognize how special that is. Because I know a lot of writers who are like, I have to write, but I hate writing. You know, I don't enjoy the process. I'm pushing it out. I'm struggling with it. For me, I never feel like that. You know, like I'm always just like, I get to write. Like, I can't believe I get to write all day today. You know, when I get to clear out space and just write, there's times when, you know, I'm the kind of writer who, like, I'll wake up in the morning. Usually the content is there. Like, something's there. It's like, you have to write about this. Like, you have to write about this. Writing fiction is really a pleasurable, daunting experience because it's not about reacting to the world in that day in the same way. It's really like stepping back and world building, and I feel like a student there. So I like the balance in my life of getting to be someone who knows about certain things and is still learning about others. And then I really like that I get to determine how my time is spent. I think, you know, I have found myself saying a lot that I feel like one of the freest people to ever live. And I'm like, why does it feel that way? You know, like I've done a bunch of study of like my own lineage and my ancestral lines and what humans have been up to. And so much of human history is shaped around the labor of survival, the labor of obligation, or the labor of subjugation, like being in conditions where you didn't get to determine how you spent your own time. And then a lot of it was like, how do we survive how other people feel about us, hate us, want to oppress us, want to tear us down? And I've got all the different things. I'm like Black, I'm queer, I'm a woman, I'm disabled, like of all the things that traditionally have been like, oh, you are not going to get to do what you want to do. And so the fact that I wake up most days and I'm like, I want to do everything that's on my schedule. I only say yes to things I want to do. Like this conversation, I'm like, it's like I open up my calendar for the day and I'm like, that's going to be wonderful. You know, and so I feel really strongly that like, I'm like, that's my favorite part about my life is, and I work a lot, but I don't feel like I hustle. You know, I don't feel like I'm like in a tense hustling place. I did for a long time, but one of the nice things about being in social justice work for a long time is I learned that I can really live a satisfying life on not a lot of income. So I have a great life and I have enough, and I'm not constantly like striving for like, I need a Benz, you know, I'm like, that's not driving me. I want to be able to write. I like being in love. You know, I don't need a massive house. I just want enough space. So that gives me a lot of freedom in my days. Cause I'm like, okay, I have enough. I'm good. Let's do what I want to do.
That's great. What's the most challenging thing about all of this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I don't have some other boss, there's no one else telling me what to do. So the most challenging part is sometimes figuring out like, how do you write a book? You know, like, or how do I make a deadline? Like I've had to create systems of deadline for myself. So that's been one. It's just like, when do I know something's complete? I have to often be the one who determines that something is complete. Like there's no one else to be like, yeah, I approve that. I'm like, do I think it's done? I think the other part is what society is up to right now is it's daunting to be a visible person in any way, because on one hand, people are like, oh, I love you. Like, I want to put you up in some visible space. But we're also really structured around destruction of those that we can see, and we'll destroy for any reason, you know? So whatever it is that we're like, oh, this is your weak point, or this is your mistake, or this is your thing. There's a lot of, like, as soon as you're like, oh, I'm doing what I love, there's someone who's like, I hate you. You know, like, what? You don't know me. Well, you know, hate is such a strong emotion to focus on and generate. And it's not how I'm structured. Like, I'm like, if I don't like an artist or a writer or a movement thinker or whatever, I just don't put my mind on them. Mm-hmm. You know, like, that's my critique is like, it's not for me. They're clearly in service of something else and someone else because they have followers, and that's okay. But I bring my attention away. And so that part is always challenging, where I'm like, my ego, you know, I'm an appease, I'm a likable person, or at least I want to be. And for a long time, it was important to my work. You know, as a facilitator, it's important to come in and not be ruffling the feathers in the room, because it's like, it's not about me. I need to be kind of a neutral, kind energy that can allow movement to happen here. But now, you know, as a writer, I get to step out more and more as, here's what I think about things. Here's how I feel. And like, you know, like pleasure activism, like that was a major leap from what I had been doing and where I had been. Like, suddenly I was like, also, let's talk about squirting. Also, let's talk about consent. Also, let's talk about, you know, spanking. Let's talk about these very important topics. And there were a lot of people who were like, I don't respect that, or I don't understand, you know, like, how am I supposed to honor that or take you seriously as a leader? And then I've done other books that were like challenging, you know, people are like, what? That's not what we wanted from you. I'm learning, though, to also take that challenge as growth, as a way of growing, as an invitation to grow. I can't remember who said it right now, maybe Baldwin, but it's like, if you're not upsetting anyone, then you're not actually doing your job well. You know, like, if no one is critiquing the work, then you're not actually taking any risks. And so in that way, I start to receive certain challenges as like, okay, I'm taking risks. And, you know, Brene Brown has this book, Daring Greatly, which I recommend to people when it's like, I'm trying to take a risk. Yeah, you know that book, right? Yeah. So in it, she quotes, I think it's Teddy Roosevelt in the beginning. And she's like, if you're not in the arena, you know, basically it's like, don't listen to the people who are not in the arena. And if you're brave with your life and you choose to live in the arena, then you're going to get your ass kicked. And I love that, right? I love that I'm like, yes, you know, if I have haters, or if I have challenging critiques, or if I have stuff like that, it means I'm in there in the space, trying to learn and trying to figure it out. So learning in public is really challenging, but I feel committed to continually doing that. And I'm trying to think if there's other challenges. There's a certain loneliness to a writer's life sometimes. It's like a self-imposed thing, you know, but I'm like, I'm clearing out space. I'm clearing out space. And I'm like, I'm all by myself in this space, you know? So sometimes there's that. Having my fiance now has helped a lot with that. But there were years there where I wasn't with anyone, and I had started to make room for writing. And I was just like, am I just going to be like alone for the next 50 years writing books? Because my characters are good company. Like, I love being in a book and being in a writing process. I have great friends who check on me and who show up with me. But it's sort of especially when you're trying to write something new or something that feels new, there's a way that you're inching out onto a certain limb by yourself, and it can feel lonely there. I think now I kind of go out there and then I come back to the whatever trunk of the tree. I'm just like, okay, I need nourishing. I need loving up. I need my people to kind of circle around me. like when I release a book now, I don't like, I kind of turn way deep inward. It's like, okay, book, go out there. I'm going to go turn deeply inward, check in with my people, let them just love up on me for completion. Because out there on the limb, you know, people start throwing things, yelling things, you know, it's like, hold on, I don't know how people gonna feel about this, but I'm going to go get nourished first before I look at the reviews. You know?
Well, yeah. So. And it's a blessing that you have that space where you can be nourished in those times. Yeah.
Inner circle is everything.
Yes.
All right. So, you know, we talk about sex. So we always ask folks, what was the prevailing attitude about sex in your home growing up?
I feel like it was generally positive, but private. So I don't remember seeing my parents interact with each other much physically, like in a way that was like, they're getting it in, you know, like that's their vibe. I know that I was the oldest of 3. So I was like, y'all, I'm still making more babies somewhere. And I know that they loved each other. They were very cute, like adoring with each other. And I remember reaching a certain age where my mom was like, yeah, just always make sure that part of the relationship is good. You know, she's like, if something's wrong with the sex part of the relationship, it's going to be hard for the rest of it to work. And I thought that was really good advice. It has been very good advice in my life. Like there have been periods where I was like, I think everything's great, but I'm not satisfied. You know, she's like, no, get out of there. You know,
because it only gets worse.
It's only going to get worse, A. And B, she's like, there's something in that root system of desiring each other and being able, she's like, you know, you just can work through a lot in that space. And I do find that to be the case in my loving relationships. Like the best my relationships I've had have been ones where I was like, we mad? Let's go work it out. You know, makeup sex is a really magical thing in a healthy relationship. And yeah, but that was it when I was growing up. It was, you know, my parents are both Southerners. I don't think my dad's ever read Pleasure Activism. You know, like this is something you don't really talk about.
Yeah.
And yeah, right. That was kind of the energy.
So, I mean, you just talked about how that influences your relationships now. I'm wondering how coming from that space, being rooted there, influences your work now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting because there's still this part of me that is always like, I can't believe we're talking about this, you know? And when I was doing the book tour for Pleasure Activism, it was actually hilarious because I would do kind of this dealer's choice thing with the audiences, you know, because it was like be in a room with a couple hundred people. And I was like, which pieces do you want me to read? And there was always the nipple piece, the squirting piece. Like it was always like the pieces that I was
the
like,
pieces where you like in front of people.
I was like in front of people and like comrades, right?
Yeah.
Like in front of people, I'm like, I've been your facilitator for years. I've maybe been your boss or whatever. And I'm like, so squirting. So, so there's still in me that kind of trained in, you know, I don't know if it's prudishness or like a sort of polite company. There's like something in there that's like, oh, Adrienne, even as I'm the one who's crossing those boundaries. And I think there's a real sense of like love should be a part of all of it. Like growing up in, you know, what felt important in the household I grew up in was like love matters so much, and being loved and loving matters so much. And I think that shows up in every aspect of my work now. It's like everyone deserves to be loved. Everyone deserves that. And you don't have to perform it for other people. You don't have to show that, but you need to know that it's good. Like you need to know that you're loved and that you have your people. And that shapes a lot of my work now. There's a lot actually that I don't share with the public now, but it's because it's good. You know, I'm like, this is functional. This is great. This is working. I feel deeply joyful. I feel deeply satisfied. And I'm like, that doesn't have to be performative. You know, it doesn't have to be for the gram. In some ways, I feel like I'm trying to notice that. I'm like, for some people, the most healing thing you can do is reveal more. And for some people, the most healing thing you can do is really tune in and make sure you're in an authentic place.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know which medicine is the right one for you.
Right. Yeah.
So we asked you to come on the show because pleasure activism aligns so closely with what we do here. I opened up by saying it is one of our guiding lights. Tell us a little bit about that book and what did you want, what pushed you to write it?
You know, that was one of the books that it was like, I'm going to be written. Like I kept waking up with clear stuff that wanted to be said. And it just kept showing up in my life. I've always, you know, since I was in my early 20s, I was like really aware of how important sex and orgasm and pleasure were to my reclamation of myself as a fat Black woman. And then doing drugs was like important to me, you know, like I'm like, I really feel like a large reason why I'm in touch with myself in the ways that I am is due to mushrooms and weed and ecstasy. And I felt like I was around a lot of people who had similar experiences of really positive experiences of sex and drugs, helping them to become themselves, and yet feeling like we had to hide that part. Like we were living in some mythological society where those things were naughty or bad. I'm like, no, we're all adults. And what we're not talking about is actually allowing so much harm to happen because we don't talk about our desires. We don't talk about our drug use. We don't talk about our sex lives. And it means some people are just never having great sex. Some people are having really unhealthy sexual relationships. I think a lot of the harm, sexual abuse, things like that come from repressed desires and mishandled desires and things that don't get spoken about. Things that people are like, oh, I'm ashamed. And I'm like, you don't need to be ashamed. You need to find people who share that kink with you and like where you can consensually do that thing. You need to find people who can help you heal if something has been harmed or broken. So all of that was a big part of my life. And, you know, one of my first movement jobs was at a place called the Harm Reduction Coalition. And so it was training people in how do you reduce the harm that comes from drugs and sex. And it was I'm so grateful that was one of the first things I ever did professionally, because I was around a lot of other adults who were like, we're fucking, we're fucking and we're drugging and we're high. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. And actually there's something wrong with being in a society that acts like the poor people and the Black people and other folks who do that are somehow bad and wrong, even though everyone's doing it. And, you know, now we see that we live in a society where like white people are getting very wealthy off of selling marijuana while Black people are sitting in prison for the same thing. So all of that was fascinating to me. So first I started doing this column for Bitch Magazine called The Pleasure Dome. I was just like, let me feel into what it's like to write about these things more publicly. Like I had done a little dabbling on my blog and it was so good. And I got such positive responses. People were like, thank God you're talking about this. And like from a social justice perspective, from an abolitionist perspective, from a radical perspective, that there's nothing wrong with us. You know, there's nothing wrong with desire. And everything can be in alignment with the future we want. So the book, I feel like the book really was pushing itself out. And then there were these edges I would come to where I was like, I don't know enough about this, but I know who does. And so it was really a hybrid of my own writing and an anthology of other people who I really look up to and learn from. And there's another book in the works now that is going to be a book on Black feminist kink that is, I'm really excited about. I have a team of incredible Black radical feminist women who are working on that now and teaching me. You know, I'm like, tell me everything, because y'all are further, you know, they're further along than I am in the practices. And I'm like, I think we have a lot to learn from the BDSM kink communities around how we communicate what we want and need and getting it. So yeah. some stuff there.
That's so dope. I actually just got back from a conference, and I was at the Sex Down South conference, and so there were lots of kink practitioners there, and I went to a workshop that was about BDSM and its therapeutic benefits. And I felt like I was at a Jodeci concert. It was like all Black women in there.
Yes.
It was just full of Black women. At the end, we were like, so how do I join? And
yes,
it's wild, because I feel like the more Black women get exposed to this, the more they're like, this seems pretty interesting. I mean, some might not identify, because I think we hear about BDSM and the first thing that goes to our mind is submission, which that's some people's thing.
Yeah.
But
yes,
there's so many parts of it, right?
Yeah, there's so many parts of it. And I think for me, the thing that is important is we have, Black women's history, especially in the US, is that we were brought here to be in total subjugation, our bodies to be used as labor, as sexual labor, as whatever was demanded of us. And there was harm, there was pain. It was built into the structure. And I think that for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I would never want to go someplace where there was harm, there was pain, there was submission, But I think the thing that's been fascinating to me about everything I've been learning in my dabbling practices are like, it's actually about power, and it's about reclaiming power over every aspect of this. And I wish that every single person who has sex of any gender, background, anything, would go through the BDSM checklist, right? Or would go through that aftercare checklist and just be like, here's the things that I know I like. Here's what I know I don't like. Here's what I consent to. Here's what my safety language is if I need to change that arrangement. Here's what I need afterwards in order to feel cared for and loved. Like, that stuff is just brilliant for anyone who's negotiating sex with a new partner. And I think the BDSM community teaches us a lot. I also have been blown away by my gay male friends who are negotiating a lot of this stuff on apps. Like, I remember when Grindr came out, and they were all like, yeah, like, I'm doing all this stuff by chat before I ever get there. And so I walk in the door, and we both know what's up, and we both know what we've agreed to. And we both have to honor that. And, they were having sex with people where they're like, we don't even know each other's names necessarily, but we had a very deep, intimate experience where we both were in consensual, pleasurable, time. I'm like, okay, how can I make sure that Black women get to experience something like that? Because what I'm hearing concurrently from Black women is that we keep ending up in relationships where we don't feel empowered to articulate what we want, where we have been trained and socialized that our job is just to please our partner. And it's not just our male partners. Those dynamics shift over into queer relationships too. Like, patriarchy is still present. And that being in service rather than being in a collaborative, experience towards pleasure, that's built in. So we have to actually intentionally think of doing something differently if we want different results. So I love the tools of it. And then I think it's important to testify when you do have an experience that's like, oh, wow, that kind of blew my mind in ways that I didn't expect. Like, I find it very fascinating that there's so many Black women who love being flogged or being spanked or being hit in those kind of ways where they're like, I'm in charge of this. Because I'm like, what happened for that to be a healing and pleasurable experience for people whose lineage comes from slavery? I'm like, that is a massive transformative thing to be able to do in a few short generations. And it's undeniably right. To me, it's part of why I'm like, I don't think anyone should ever be spanking children, because I'm like, there's a pleasure sensibility to this act that shouldn't actually be done between children who can't consent, and it's being done as a punishment. I think it's confusing. I don't think anyone should ever hit a kid for any reason, but especially that reason. But I'm like, oh, the more I understand what spanking actually is, the less I think it should happen to anyone who can't consent to it. So there's just all this fascinating stuff there to be that I'm like, let's unlock those conversations and not be ashamed of them. I also meet a lot of Black women who are like, they'll whisper to me what they want. And I'm like, you're telling me that. I'm not going to bed with you. I'm not going to be able to help you get that. Right? Yeah. I'm like, you don't feel like comfortable telling the person you're having sex with or the people you're having sex with what you actually want. Let's work on that, because everyone deserves a space where they can articulate their desires and have them be held and figure out, is there a safe, consensual way to have this experience?
Mm-hmm. So we know that pleasure activism, we've touched on this, is so much more than just sex. But as you mentioned, you do have chapters on nipples and squirting. And you also mentioned earlier that sometimes you struggle with integrating your sexual self with your other selves. Like, how do you find common ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten easier. It definitely helped putting that book out. Putting the book out, one of the things that happened after the book came out, I was still actively facilitating during that time. And I started showing up spaces, and like, if people were late, or, you know, if we had a break, folks were like pulling me to the side, like, can we talk about the pleasure? Can we talk about sex? Can we talk about it? And so what I found is that I became a little bit of a portal for people, that they were like, now I know. It's, you know, sometimes you just become like a portal or a beacon just by being or talking about something. So suddenly people were, you know, texting me, I just had this orgasm, and DMing me about the pleasure practices they were in. And what it made me realize is that it actually was helpful. The more I could integrate this for myself, the more I could actually be of use to all the people who are like, I'm in relationship to you, I trust you, and you're able to talk about these things, like, you know, help. And so to me, the integration was both for myself, because I'm like, this is just the truth of my life, is that I'm a sexual goddess. I've been that way since forever. Like, I can't remember, even at a very young age, I was thinking about pleasure. You know, my mom was like, you were always making out with your friends. You were always physically in touch with them. You know, like, I was always getting caught under the covers with someone, you know, like, I was just like, that was always me. And the only thing that put me off that path was going through experiences of sexual harm and sexual assault, and like having to recover from those experiences and be like, actually, this is still me. Like, what was done was not about sex, but about power.
Or about you.
And exactly. It was like, that's that person's work, but mine is to continue healing and to be my whole self. So it feels now much more integrated into who and how I am all the time. And one of the things that's been fascinating more recently is I've been experiencing so much satisfaction in my life in general. Like, I have been writing the books I want to write. I'm in partnerships I want to be in. I'm engaged. I have all of my nibblings and my family are doing well. My friendships are deep. And so I've been saying, like, I feel like I'm experiencing like lifegasms, you know, like there's something that I used to think only happened for me in the orgasmic realm of the bedroom, that I'm like, oh no, this feeling can be expanded into my whole life. And I wrote about this, like, living in the yes in pleasure activism. And at that point, I think I was like maybe 60 to 70% there. Like, I was like, this feels good. I can feel this. This is great. But actually putting the book out unleashed a whole different level, right? Where just like, I'm still withholding parts of my truth and parts of myself. And the more I can actually let those out and articulate them, the more aligned I can be in my life. So I feel like now I move fluidly through my wholeness. And I think the other piece is I don't feel like I have to perform anything around it, you know? So, because I feel like there's that pendulum swing where it's like you move from the prudishness all the way to like, oh, I'm only, you know, like, I'm only talking about sex and fucking and talking and, you know, like, and like, you can also end up on the other side of that spectrum where you're sexualizing every experience and every relationship and everything. I definitely went through that too. You know, I was like, everyone's hot. And I'm like, well,
Maybe not.
everyone is hot, but I'm not actually attracted to everyone. Like, I'm very picky. Even when I was in my very, like, I've got different lovers all over the country phase, I was still very picky about who they were and what experience I wanted to have. And now I'm in this new wild experience where I'm like in a monogamous engagement with someone that I'm like madly in love with and deeply attracted to, and growing, you know, like growing a pleasurable life with, right? Where it's like, oh, we both are looking for the utmost joy and the utmost feeling good throughout our lives. And sometimes that looks like erotic dates, painting. And sometimes that looks like going to movies. And sometimes that looks like making love. And, you know, it's like, it starts to weave into everything.
So you write quite beautifully in Pleasure Activism about how pleasure led you to fall in love with yourself through the terrain of your body. And as someone who I quite frankly struggle with that, like I even long, like, so I'm disabled now, but even long before that, body image has been a thing for me. And I'm wondering, like, can we talk about how you got there and how you stay there? Because I also
well,
know
that's
that,
what I was going to say. I was like, it's not a one-time journey. It's daily practice. It's really daily practice. And there's some practices that I return to over and over again that help me. Looking at myself, like really contending with myself in the mirror. And I'm very much like, I look at myself and I'm like, yes, like, look at this. Let me see this body. Turn around. Let me see that ass. Like, you look good. And I'm always on the precipice of posting like so many nudes on Instagram, because I'm just like, I look so good to me.
yes.
And it's just like, it's, you know, so that self-affirmation practice feels really important. And I say in the book, I think I talk about how I started with doing one part of me at a time. So I started with like my left pinky finger, because that was undoubtedly lovable. And I worked my way up to parts that seemed less lovable to me at the time. And since Pleasure Activism came out, my ability has shifted pretty drastically. And my arthritis has taken off. You know, it's just sort of like, some days I wake up and I'm like, I feel like I'm in a bone cage. Like, I can't move the way I want to move, which has meant that there's been a lot of grief. You know, like, I feel young to be as limited in my range of motion as I am. I've had to get really creative about like, what can I still do? I'm having to like change what I eat and other things, you know, just be like, okay, that is inflammation and that's not, like, you know, those kind of things. And so now that's become part of my self-love practice, right? Is to really think with every single thing that enters my body, how is this going to feel as it moves through me? And does this serve my utmost mobility, my utmost health, my utmost well-being? Or does this serve like a kind of short-term pleasure that's going to actually cause me a lot of pain? And Ingrid LaFleur actually talks about that in the book. It's like, how do you live that pleasure life? So I'll also say it's really noticing the things that I have been trained to not like in my body. You know, so I'm like, oh, like, I have been trained not to like cellulite in my body and to feel really negatively towards it. Let me get curious about that. Like, could I produce a different feeling in myself around cellulite? Are there any people, you know, on Instagram, like, I really love looking at the fat girls, the big girls on Instagram, and just seeing what they're up to. Lizzo has been really helpful for me. Like, I find it helps to have sort of folks who are like, you know, Gabby Fresh and Lizzo and other people who are larger and who just be like up there. Jazz on Your Mind is one of my favorites, because she is a big girl with like juicy, big old thighs and cellulite and everything. And she just gets and twerks and shakes everything. I'm like, it looks so good when she does it. Like, I'm like, maybe it looks good when I do it. It's just perspective. I've really transformed my thought process around stretch marks. Like, I used to think, oh, those can't be good. But I've actually found on my lovers that I love their stretch marks, because it's something so distinct to them And I'm like, that is my boo right there. That's mine. So like, it's so funny now. I'm like super into my own stretch marks and how they, there's an intimacy, like all these things that we think of as imperfections. Those are the intimacies. That's how someone knows they're with us. Those are the markers, right? It's like, that's the map, the cartography of your particular body. And so all of that helps me feel more loving to myself. And it does really help to understand that it's like, I'm in a society that has trained me not to like my body. And that should be interrogated, but there's nothing actually wrong with my body. And I do a lot of gratitude practices now. My therapist has got me really into this she's like, yes, you have a lot less ability than you did a year ago, but you have a lot more ability than you might a year from now. So let's be really present with the ability you have right now. And let's be really grateful for all of it. And when the pain comes, that's a limitation. How can you be really grateful for your body saying, oh, hold on, message, I can't do that. That's not, like my body is actually communicating with me all the time. And something about that is really humbling, right? That I'm like, this body is an ecosystem. It's not a machine, I'm alive. And I've lost a lot of people in my life. So I think that's also a big part of it for me, is being like, I'm alive. This is what my aliveness looks like today. Let me be grateful for this aliveness today. And, it's one of the conversations I plan to have with the Creator someday. Is just a little like, I don't understand why the allergies had to happen. Like, I think I could have enjoyed things more if I could eat almonds. I would love to not, I just don't understand why you made me love pizza if I wasn't supposed to be eating pizza this much. There's some of it I'm just like, this feels like a creative glitch. This doesn't feel like it's on me. But yeah, I being with what is, and when I'm in touch with my mortality, it makes it much easier to just be really deeply in love with the body I have. And going through loss with people and being like, I loved their body until the very last breath. There's nothing wrong with it because it was the body of the person I loved. And, yeah. So how can I be like that with my own body? Just like, this is me. This is Adrienne. This is my body. It's great.
I love that. I'm sorry. I'm clearly like going through it.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is what it is, right? You have to open yourself. Like, you asked for a medicine that you needed.
Yeah. The bit about being able to sit with where you are, that really resonates with me. My mobility has also changed quite a bit, quite drastically in just the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And thinking about the future of that, not in a way that is like, oh, it's scary, where is it going to be? But more in a, let me have gratitude for where I am now and the things that my body can still do for me.
Yeah.
That feels really good. So thank you for that.
And the relationships around it. I mean, I think if I add anything here, I've been wrestling with like, how can I be sexy if I need a special chair at Lowe's? And my partner, thank God for her, is just like, I told her that, and she's like, well, then I'm going to gas you up. And I get to that chair, she's like, you look so fine. I'm like, okay, good. I just want to make sure I still look fine. And, it's true. I'm like, we have a long way to go, I think, in understanding that disabled bodies are still sexy as fuck. They still wired for pleasure. They're like, there's still so much happening in all of our bodies. And for me, some of my greatest teachers have actually been folks in the disability justice community who have just been like, the folks at Sins Invalid, they're like, we are having so much sex, and we're having sex that actually is better because we have learned how to articulate what we actually need for our bodies. So I'm not out here, like I used to be, get on top and cowgirl off into the moon, whatever, moonlight. And I'm like, that's not the needs I have now. Right. So if I do that, it's going to be a week of torture. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, how can I ask for and it's related to the BDSM conversation too. It's like in all of these things, how can I say, here's my body, here's my ability, here's my needs, and here's how pleasure can actually work for me. And I think we should all know that about ourselves and know that it's constantly changing. And, I definitely want to be having great sex until the very last minute of my life. So I'm just like, look, if nothing is working but my clitoris, you can still suck on it. You just get on in there, because, we'll figure it out. Yeah, because, as long as this works, hey.
Let's get it. So, speaking of change, there's a sentence at the end of the intro in pleasure activism that always gets me, and you write, if this is being read in a future in which this language has evolved, then please know I will be evolving right along with you. And I love how future facing that is and how compassionate it is, like not just for the folks who are reading it, but for yourself.
Yeah.
And it also makes me wonder, Octavia Butler taught us that God has changed.
Yes.
How have any of your beliefs that you shared in the book changed in these last couple of years?
That's a good question. I think a lot about what I wrote about fantasy and the idea that we should work to get our fantasies aligned with our politics, or, that we should really notice our fantasies, especially because we're in a world where so much of what is pitched to us is actually sexual harm in different iterations. Like I think I said in the book, the top searches on most pornography sites are for incest, or for cross, a lot of it is just straight up for incest. It's like stepmom, stepbrother, step this, step that. So a lot of the culture, like we live in a rape culture, and the pornography industry really looks like that, at least the free pornography industry. But I don't know that I got it right in terms of how I wrote about fantasy. And I feel like there's more to explore there. Because what is so important to me is that people are not ashamed of what has been shaped in them by this society, but figure out like, what are ways that I can be healing in my lifetime? There's this vision that a group called Generation 5 put out to end child sexual abuse in 5 generations. And we're really in the first generation of that work. And I think about it all the time. As I'm like, I don't know how we can engage in any kind of fantasy that supports incest or supports the abuse of people who are teenagers or younger and move towards justice. I just don't know how. And I'm like, so I think we need to figure out ways to reckon with that without shaming people for being inside of that. And I think that's really hard. I hope that the writing that I did didn't come across as shaming, but I do think that there's some judgment in there, and it's judgment I'm still working my way through and trying to navigate. I think it comes from a good place. It's like when I was writing that book, I was really aware that I'm in love with all these kids who I want to protect, and I want to protect them right now, which means I want all the cycles of harm that could possibly hurt them to be done now. And facing the reality that they're not, facing the reality that like each of their parents have had to have conversations with them about like how to keep them safe. It breaks my heart. And sometimes the heart, I can feel the heartbreak in there. But overall, I feel good about what's in the book. I think I really wish there was a lot more on disability, and there were some interviews lined up that fell through and stuff like that. And so that might be another book that comes out, although there's some good stuff being worked on around it that I'm waiting to see, like, in in the next 3 years, if it's not, if I don't see the book that I'm like, that's it, then I might produce it.
Like, you got it.
So.
Yeah. Where? What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reading The Prophets, and it's amazing. If y'all follow Son of Baldwin on the internet, it's his first work of fiction, and it's so good.
Yeah, I just started it last week.
It's so good, and it starts off with like this very sexy, gay, hot sex scene. It's like this. It's about like, I mean, so far I don't know what it's. I'm in the I'm halfway through, and it's about a gay slave love story, and it's amazing. And there's a lot of other stuff happening. I just finished reading my own novel. my novella came, and I got to sit and hold it in my hands and read it, which is a different experience than, reading it on the computer and the editing process. So that was wonderful. And then I have my next book that's going to be read is Toronto Books memoir Unbound, which just came out. And
2 days ago.
I just think Toronto is one of the most important humans to ever live. And so I'm really grateful to be holding this book. And I listened to, she did a 2-part interview with Oprah about it, where she was talking about so much, it's like contending with being ugly, contending with being Black, contending with being abused, contending with all these things. And I'm just like, we need writing of this caliber and this honesty to keep becoming ourselves. So yeah, I'm grateful Black people write books.
Every day.
Every day.
So what is turning you on today?
Well, my sweetheart and I have gone through the pandemic together. And for most of it, we were like, it's just the two of us. No one's leaving the house. Everything is happening from the house. And, in my mind, that was like, we're just going to be having sex all the time. But actually, it was like really hard to keep up a sexual energy in those conditions, because it was just like, this is difficult. We never go anywhere. We're always together, and we're always wearing sweatpants. Like, I don't understand. So right now she goes off to work and she comes home, and it is like the hottest thing. Like, I love when she comes in from work and she's got a little whole outfit on that she wore to work. And I'm just like, you look so good to me. So that's turning me on these days. And then I have, a whole group of friends who are like going through sexual awakenings themselves. And it's just a lot of like vicarious delight happening, where we're cheering each other on and just being like, yes, live your best whole life. And, watching people figure out how to continuously find connected pleasure in this period of COVID is fascinating to me. I'm like, humans just evolve. Like, we just figure it out. We're never not going to figure it out. Like, we're going to have sex. So that's been turning me on. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else right now. Hot baths. I feel like I take a hot bath, and when I come out, I'm like, this is the sexiest version of myself that exists. Like, I'm clean. I'm hot. Like, I literally am steaming off, I'm just like, God, I am so hot right now. So that's me.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to do a quick lightning round.
Okay.
Of what brings you more pleasure. So I'll give you either or. You tell me which brings you the most. So
what brings me more pleasure?
Yep.
Of the things you're going to say?
Yes. Of the things I'm going to list. Okay. So breakfast or dinner?
Breakfast.
Yes. Cake or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Okay.
But just barely.
I know. I'm like, ice cream cake. No,
I was like, there's one particular cake that I have to have every year for my birthday That's a
Which
strawberry
is?
cake with chocolate frosting. And that is like nothing will take its place. And I need that. And it gives me deep pleasure. But like on a day-to-day basis throughout the year, I need my dose of ice cream almost every day. So
I got it. So is this strawberry cake with chocolate frosting like from a particular place, or is like
it is from a box
homemade?
that you get at the store. And yeah, like my parent, everyone laughs at me because they're like, "Are you ready to upgrade to a grown-up cake?" It's the same cake I've had since I was like 5 years old. I'm like, I am not. And now that no one else is around, I made it for myself this year. I was like, I don't even need to wait till my actual birthday. We can do it the whole weekend beforehand. Everyone laughs at me and my family, but I'm just like, it's the best tasting cake.
I have the most budget ass taste buds because I love a good box cake.
Box
or
cake.
Good Costco cake, like or
I'm like, this thing is jamming, and I've had so many fancy cakes, so I'm like, the flavor is not really hitting.
Yeah, no, I need.
That would make this better if it was from the grocery store.
I was like, what was good was the one that Duncan had put in a box, and then the frosting came in a little plastic container. So, and this time I actually did it grandma style, which is I didn't put it in the fridge, right? So I don't know if y'all like my grandmother is like the thing where it's like you leave a cake because it stays soft and moist and everything. You cover it and leave it on the counter. Right?
Oh yeah,
that's my norm. Like
that's so. Erica bought me a cloche with that one of them things fancy because I don't have nothing fancy.
Oh.
She bought me one for Christmas one year because I bake a lot, so that I could do that with my cakes
so
and not have them just sitting out.
I love that. For years, I was like, oh, I need to be putting this in the fridge, and so I would like put it in the fridge and then be like, oh,
it's never the same.
Yeah. So this year I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm baking it in a pan and I'm leaving it on the countertop. And it was just delicious to the last bite.
Yeah, because the last bite is like super moist.
Exactly.
Okay. Dress up or dress down?
Ooh. I like my partner to dress up and I dress down.
I like looking at you, but I want to be comfortable.
Exactly.
It's like every couple that you see in DC walking around.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, well, this looks good to me.
Beach or mountain?
Ooh, beach.
Yeah. And last one, country or city?
Country.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
nature. I'm just like loving it. I'm like, put me where I can watch what happens in nature and I will be very, very pleased.
Oh, yeah. So as we wrap up, what's next for you? So you mentioned erotica. So I feel like in this what's next for you, I need to hear about this.
Well, I was just like, well, don't count me out. So I actually won an erotica writing contest some years ago, maybe 15 years ago now. This place called Cake, New York had an erotica writing contest when I was living in New York, and I wrote erotica for it. I almost always write erotica for my partners, for like people I'm dating. That stars them or stars folks who are going on sexual adventures in space or whatever, is clever. So I love writing erotica genres. And I could definitely see myself doing that as a practice. And in this first novella, I don't think in the first novella there's any of the sex stuff. There's some in her dreams, but in the next ones, there's a lot of sex coming. So, I love writing sex. And I think it's really a beautiful practice to put poetry to and put words to. So yes, the novella, the next one will come out, I think about the same time next year. And then the third one will come out the same time the following year. And there's a lot of sensual work in those. And then the next book I have slated is a collection of poetry and short stories, or spells and short stories, called Fables and Spells, that's coming out in February.
Dope. That's what's up. So folks, if you want to keep up with Adrienne, there's a lot of different ways. You can go to the website, which is Adrienne Maree Brown. That's ADrienneMareeBrown.net. And then on Twitter, you're at Adrienne Maree. On IG, you're at Adrienne Maree Brown. And Facebook is Adrienne Maree. That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
And Instagram is the one where I most often do interesting things. Like, I think that's the best me you can get online. So.
Yes, you post a lot on IG. It's dope.
Yeah.
Word. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
This has been a true pleasure.
I loved talking with you.
Yeah, it was really lovely. Yeah. And thank all of you for listening. This is it for this week's episode of The Turn On. And we'll be back next week. Bye. This episode was produced by us, Kenry and Erica, and edited by Ballistic. The theme music is from Brazy. Hit subscribe right now in your favorite podcast app and at youtube.com/The Turn On Podcast so you'll never miss an episode.
Then follow us on Twitter at The Turn On Pod and Instagram at The Turn On Podcast. And you can find links to books, transcripts, guest info, what's turning us on, and other fun stuff at theturnonpodcast.com.
And don't forget to email us at theturnonpodcast@gmail.com with your book recommendations and your pressing sex and related questions.
And you can support the show by leaving us a 5-star review, buying some merch, or becoming a patron of the show. Just head to theturnonpodcast.com to make that happen.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Holla.